Welcome, folks. This is our webinar on how to write a strong grade and/or standing appeal. And it's brought to you by the students' unions at Toronto Metropolitan University. So the TMSU, TMGSU, and TMAPS. And we'll introduce ourselves as panelists here. Go ahead, Hector.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hector Flores, and I'm the Student Issues and Advocacy Coordinator for the Toronto Metropolitan Students' Union. I assist full-time and undergraduate students, as well as law school students, with their advocacy-related questions. And I'm happy to be here and happy to have you all and to respond to any question you may have at the end of the presentation.
Great, and my name is Lyndall Musselman, and I am the TMAPS, Toronto Metropolitan Association of Part-Time Students, student rights coordinator. And so I'm one of the recognized advocates that can speak on behalf of students and assist students with any type of appeal or complaint or issue that they're having with the university. And I also support all graduate students, in addition to all the continuing education or part-time undergraduate students who are members of TMAPS. So I hope that makes sense. We'll move along here. Oh, and for those of you here live in the webinar, feel free to use the Q&A function. If you have a question, you can ask the questions anonymously if you'd like. And it's good to think about, like, please, if you're comfortable asking questions that are very general, because then it might be helpful for other participants or other folks tuning into the recording to get the insights to your question. And we'll try to answer things as we go where possible. Okay. You can go ahead, Hector, if you'd like. Is that okay?
Okay, perfect. So a little bit of what we do is related to three main issues. As you can see, we assist students with grade and standing appeals, academic misconduct issues, and other academic advocacy, for example, fee appeals, human rights issues, general complaints. We do retroactive withdrawals. In general, we advise students on whatever issue they may be facing that could be affecting their academic performance.
Great. And then, oops, yeah. So basically, the goal of the workshop today is to help you determine if you're going to be appealing a grade that you received in this past semester, so spring, summer 2023. If you disagree with a final grade you were given in one of your courses, you would be filing a grade appeal or an academic standing appeal related to a new academic standing that you were assigned recently from the performance in the spring, summer 2023 semester. And you can file both a grade appeal and a standing appeal. More on that to come soon. And then we're also going to cover how to solve problems informally by talking with your instructor or emailing a chair or director. We're also going to touch on tips and hints for writing your appeal letter, otherwise known as a statement, and gathering supporting documentation to include in your appeal submission. And then finally, we'll go over how to file the formal appeal by the deadline, which is Thursday, September 7th at 4 p.m. So next Thursday, I believe. So great, we'll move on to why appeal.
I will be talking about why you should appeal There are many reasons to do an appeal because students face so many circumstances during their student life that are not expected or that are not foreseeable. So when something unexpected happens that impacts your academic performance, you can file an appeal. We will be speaking as to the different grounds of appeal later on in this presentation. And one thing to take into consideration is that there is little to lose and a lot to win. So if you are thinking about filing an appeal, it's always better to file it than to regret not having filed it. Anyway, we will be talking about the full details and the specifics that you need, specific requirements that you need to meet in order to be as successful as possible in an appeal. So if you don't file an appeal, essentially you are consenting with the grade or with the standing with which you may feel uncomfortable. And of course, you would need to have at least one valid ground for appeal. We will be talking about those grounds of appeal later on in this presentation. Essentially, I can anticipate that there are four main grounds for appeal. And the most common one is when you are facing extenuating circumstances. But once again, we will be talking about these unexpected, unforeseeable, and situations that represent difficulties for you to succeed academically, as well as we will be touching on the other grounds for appeal. Back to you, Linda.
Okay, so why appeal? So as Hector already touched on, there's the most common is when it's unforeseen, extenuating type of circumstances, issues, but then also you might be appealing based on grounds that fit the scenario where it's the university's policies that are not upheld, and this could negatively impact your academic performance as a result. And then we have this example here on the slide. An instructor changed the weight of the final exam at the last minute. So that would be a course management type of issue. You could also frame it as a procedural error. Anyway, we will talk about those type of grounds for appeal as well. And again, I do want to say, maybe Hector, you did say this specifically, but it is Senate Policy 168, which is the grade and standing appeal policy. So I'll put a link in the chat to share with everyone shortly, in case you want to review the actual policy.
Yet a third reason to appeal is when you disagree with your new standing based on, once again, a valid ground for appeal. So it is important to say that according to policy 168, you may only appeal the standings of required to withdraw, that is more commonly known as RTW, or permanent program withdrawal, which is more commonly known as PPW, or in case of graduate students, the standing of withdrawn. And once again, you would need to meet at least one of the grounds of appeal. As you will see during this presentation, it is paramount that you have a valid ground for appeal whenever you are considering raising any kind of issue. Back to you, Linda.
Okay, so as a setting, as your recent grade or your new academic standing might be, unfortunately, not everyone is going to have grounds for submitting a strong appeal. So this is basically just a heads up to all of you that the appeal process can be challenging, especially if you had not consulted or reached out or asked questions or sought assistance during the semester in question. that can make it really difficult for your appeal to be granted according to how some of the decision makers interpret the policy. But we are here to help you. And we'll just explain how to approach things as best possible, given whatever kind of circumstance or situation you're in at this point. Okay. So, Hector, are you okay with this slide?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So as a first step, and we understand that it might be a little bit late for some of you by now, you should reach out to your instructors as soon as you're facing any kind of difficulty that could be affecting your academic performance. If the case is that for any reason you did not reach out to the professor or you did not attempt to resolve your situation informally, it is important to mention that in the appeal letter and to explain why you had difficulties reaching out to the professors. It is very important to say that the professors are a very important resource because what we call an informal resolution can then become a formal appeal. And if you can reach any kind of resolution before filing the appeal, you would save the effort and the process in the appeal. So the informal process allows you, as the slide says, more leeway in the sense that you would be informally talking to your instructor. And of course, if you don't receive any positive response, or if you simply don't get any kind of response, you should be raising your issues to the program chair or the program director, depending on your specific school or program. Some students are not aware that the same policy 168 establishes that it is the student's responsibility to reach out to the professors to try to reach an informal resolution. And it even goes further to say that if you fail to reach out for an informal resolution, you may be jeopardizing the possibilities of success in further appeal. So speak with your instructors or even with the chair of the program. And yes, it may sound intimidating and it may sound like I've heard a lot of students saying that they don't feel comfortable reaching out to the professors. But the truth is that they are always open, or almost always, I cannot generalize, but almost always open to help and to find solutions to the students' problems. And it is always better to reach out as soon as the specific situation arises, because that way it makes you look proactive rather than reactive. And it doesn't feel like you're only making up an excuse, but rather you are taking due steps to remedy any kind of situation. So if you speak with your professor or with the chair of the program, make sure to highlight that in your appeal. And you can even include screenshots of your emails or even copies of your emails or PDFs to show that you took action. If you didn't, as I was saying before, just explain why not, explain your own situation. It can be as simple as saying that you didn't know that you had this opportunity to reach out to your professor or to the program chair, or that you felt uncomfortable discussing particular kind of issues. But anyways, include some reason why you didn't speak with your instructor or the program chair. And it is very important, of course, for you to be aware who is your program chair since the outgo. We will also be talking on how to include this in your appeal letter further on this presentation. Back to you, Linda.
Thanks. Okay, so on to more about the types of appeals. So just as we've alluded to already. We'll go over what a grade appeal is and what a standing appeal is, because they are separate types of appeals. Like if you want to do both appeals, you have to do one at a time in the submission system anyway. You can't do them sort of simultaneously. Grade appeal, again, is when you're appealing the official final grade that you received for a course. And you could file multiple grade appeals. That might be really recommended if something, for example, happened that affected all of your courses from the past semester. You'll find that you'll be writing a similar statement, similar content, but you do need to customize each grade appeal submission by addressing what happened with a specific instructor for the course, whichever assignments were impacted, and the specific timeline. All of that needs to be customized for each grade appeal. So just be mindful of that. And then with a standing appeal, you can only appeal being either required to withdraw, RTW, or permanently program withdrawn, PPW, for undergraduate students. And then graduate students can only do a standing appeal for being withdrawn. So this means that you cannot appeal being on a probationary contract or being provisional if you're a graduate student. So in your standing appeal, remember that you can address issues that happened throughout your entire time at the university. You don't need to be limiting yourself to only what happened last semester, though some people, some decision makers might view that what happened in the last semester is the most relevant potentially. But you can address the full kind of scope, the whole timeline of when you were in your program, because often that has a cumulative sort of impact on your GPA, on your overall performance in the program. Okay, we'll go on to, yeah, I'll cover this because it sort of relates to what I've already been saying. Why not submit both appeals? So students whose academic standing was affected by one or more poor grades are encouraged to submit both, because a grade appeal should be considered first. And if you're successful with the grade appeal, if the appeal is granted and you are allowed to, for example, maybe write the final exam again, like if you missed the final exam and didn't have an opportunity to have a makeup, you could be allowed a makeup through the appeal process. That could be the remedy that you request, and it could be done, and then you could get a grade, and that could enable you to get a grade that in that course that will allow you to pass and maybe meet whatever standards that are needed to resolve your academic standing concern. I hope that makes sense. So basically what can happen with a grade appeal, like the outcome could change your academic standing. And so that is the rationale for why grade appeals should always be considered first before a standing appeal. Yeah, and then and like the last little point here says it's supposed to happen that way, though sometimes people in the university at different departments might be sort of new to handling this and might skip over the fact that there was also grade appeal submitted to another department. So sometimes decision makers get a bit hasty and rush ahead with making decisions on standing appeals. So if that happens, just be in touch with Hector and I, and we can follow up on your behalf, or feel free to check in with the Senate office around a concern like that. The Senate office, by the way, should be a resource that students can use if there's any trouble with the submission system or any confusing things that happen even with decision making. You can consult with them about anything related to the appeals process, actually, and we have their contact information on a later slide.
Standing appeal reminder, whenever you file a standing appeal, some students wonder if they are able to enroll in courses, and the simple answer is yes. In fact, you have the right to enroll in courses while your standing appeal is under consideration, and you have to fulfill all of your academic requirements. So you have to comply with all the graded components of your course as if you were in a regular situation under the specific consideration that you may be winning the appeal. And if you win the appeal, your standing would be reversed to clear or to probationary at the very least, and you would have the right to continue in your course as usual. It is very important always to consult with your program representative because there may be some situations where you might not be able to enroll via the electronic system. It may have some electronic instructions to not allow the enrollment because of your standing, and sometimes it does not detect that you have filed the corresponding appeal. So you should consult your program representative to ask to be manually enrolled if you face any kind of difficulty. And it is also important to mention that in case that your appeal is denied, you would be dropped from the courses, and you could be asking for a fee refund in some cases.
Great. I just wanted to add a little point about the fee appeal. Fee refund that you would receive in this situation is that, unfortunately, with Chang school courses, they usually kind of hold on to a portion. So you may not be receiving a full refund, but you should at a minimum get a partial or a percentage of your fees for the course or courses refunded or applied as credit to your account with the university. Anyway, okay, now we go on to grounds for appeal. So here's a summary of the formal grounds for appeal, or the reasons for appealing based in the grade and staining appeal policy. Oops, and it says police instead of policy. I forgot to fix that. There's extenuating circumstances, procedural error, course management, and prejudice grounds. We will go over each ground in detail in the next slides.
So the first ground that we would like to talk about is prejudice. And prejudice is related to the human rights and the human rights services. Just so you know, the Toronto Metropolitan University has an office that helps students with their human rights issues. So if you feel that you have been experiencing any kind of discrimination on the basis of any of the grounds that are covered in the Ontario Human Rights Code, you should be reaching out to the Human Rights Office. Here is the contact information. Just to give you some of those grounds, they could be based on race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and I believe that there are 16 different grounds for discrimination. One of them very relevant with grounds on disability. So whenever you feel that you are facing any kind of discrimination, you should be, of course, through Lindal and through me, we can direct you to the corresponding officers at the Human Rights Office, and the claim would go that route. It is important to let you know that whenever there is a human rights investigation, the grade and standing appeal would be kept on hold until there is a final report done by the Human Rights Office where they resolve the discrimination issue. Once that is, because that can have an impact on the way in which your appeal is resolved. So once the investigation is finished and the report is done, if there is still ground to continue with the appeal process, your grade and standing appeals would continue only after the investigation is concluded.
Okay, thanks, Hector. And sorry about moving the slide ahead. I didn't mean to do that. I was doing other things. And also just wanted to note that if you do have a question, you're welcome to use the Q&A as someone just did. And I'll answer it live. And they just asked, will this recording be made available later? So yes, it will, unless something strange happens with this recording and we choose not to make it public or available. But in theory, yes, we will send out the link to the recording probably just by the end of this week. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. And we'll move along to extenuating circumstances. So this grounds of appeal is the most common. This is, I think, the most claimed grounds that the students use. And this definition is really important. So carefully process and understand these like three kind of pieces that are broken out here in this definition here on the slide. So I'll read it out too, just for emphasis, because it is so important. So appeals may be filed on the ground of extenuating circumstances when students believe that there have been occurrences of reasonable significance that A, are outside a student's immediate control, B, could not have reasonably been foreseen or avoided, and C, significantly impacted the student's ability to fulfill the academic requirements. So when you are claiming this grounds, it's usually something like a death in the family that maybe occurred, being evicted from your apartment. It could be kind of domestic or personal conflicts that come up. Could even be like if you got into a serious fight with your roommate, or you somehow like lost your keys and could not access your apartment for a couple of days or something, and you couldn't get your computer to finish an assignment. That is the type of thing that like you could fit into these points, this criteria. So you just have to explain how that issue or event was outside of your control, beyond your control, and how it was not reasonably, whatever that means, foreseeable. At the time in question, you may have been compromised or unwell, overwhelmed, right? So you should just like flush that out in your statement to make that clear that it was something that you did not foresee at the time at all, and that you couldn't have avoided the issue. So just explain it in that way. And then finally, C, just make sure to tie it into how it affected your studies or your ability to perform academically, right? And then, yeah, I see the question in the Q&A. Okay, so I think get to that one later, and Hector's typing a response anyways. Okay, so that's extenuating circumstances. So it often is being unwell, which includes mental health concerns, absolutely. Family issues, it could be your parents going through separation, could be you yourself going through a separation or divorce or a breakup. But you have to try to substantiate things as best you can. We'll talk more about supporting documentation as we continue with the presentation.
Procedural error is less frequent ground for appeal, but still a valid one if you believe that the university policy or regulation was not followed correctly. So it is very important to say that simply disagreeing with a decision does not necessarily constitute a procedural error. And here we are giving an example where you provided detailed reasons for your exam to be reassessed, and as stated in policy 162, which is called the grade reassessment and grade recalculation policy, but still your reassessment was not properly completed. And as I was saying before, the simple fact that you disagree with the grades that you were assigned does not necessarily mean that you are entitled to a reassessment or a recalculation. You must provide evidence of the regulation or policy that was not properly applied and demonstrate how it affected your academic progress. So once again, it is very important not to confuse a procedural error with a disagreement that you may have with, for example, in this case, an assigned grade.
Okay, thank you, Hector. Okay, on to course management grounds. So this is typically only going to be for grade appeals for all undergraduate students. However, for any graduate students that might be tuned in or watching this recording, course management could apply to a standing appeal, especially if it's related to issues with a supervisor. So just be mindful of that. So course management concerns typically are related to the policy 166, the course management policy, which basically sets out how all course outlines should be structured, how information and notice should be provided to students about deadlines, about the weight of course components, basically like how they should, engage with the professor if necessary, about any issues, or how to, do well in the course. The course outline should make that clear, right? So sometimes there are deviations from the course management policy and things that can negatively impact the student's grade as a result. So here are some examples. If there's no graded work received prior to the deadline to drop a course. So for the spring, summer semesters, it's always a bit complicated because it's not one singular date, because courses sometimes are condensed and only run for a shorter time frame. So there are different drop deadlines for this past semester. So you would have to look it up based on the university's significant dates, or you can even use their Google Calendar to look back to find when your specific drop deadline was for that course. And if you're confused, you can always reach out to either Hector or I, or even ask your program coordinator. They are usually pretty on top of these type of deadlines and know when they were. And then the other example is lack of feedback that would have helped for a subsequent assignment. So say that your project one, like marks and evaluations were not provided to you until really late in the semester. So you couldn't benefit from that feedback. You didn't get to see where you went wrong, where you went right, to sort of learn that for next time, right? So think about whether that applies to you. And then finally, if there was a change to the course outline or syllabi that was not provided to students in writing or announced in a timely way. So think about that. Maybe it impacts you or it fits with what your experience was. Okay.
So it is very important to mention that you need supporting documents. Although all of you have the right to file an appeal if you meet any of the grounds, it is not enough, as I was saying before, to disagree with your grade or with your standing. You need one valid ground of appeal and the necessary supporting documents. Some students write very beautiful appeal letters. They make a very good, concise, and chronological explanation of what happened. And the decision maker can still say that everything's fine, but that they cannot grant the appeal because there is no evidence. We want you to be successful at the first level of appeal, so it is crucial that you provide all the relevant information and all the relevant supporting documents that you can provide to support your position. There is almost no limitation as to the kind of evidence that you can provide, and you can be creative in that regard. Please be mindful that you need to prove your case, and these kind of cases are resolved on what we call a balance of probabilities. So you must be demonstrating that it is more probable than not that you suffered extenuating circumstances, or that there were procedural errors, or that there were course management issues, or of course that there was prejudice, which are the 4 grounds for appeal. So whenever you're submitting your supporting documentation, be mindful of carefully labeling that documentation, and make reference, of course, to the supporting documentation in your appeal letter. Here are some examples. In the slide, we set up some examples of what we consider to be good documentation to support your appeal letter. And this includes a health certificate. And Linda already posted a website where you can find the generally acceptable format that TMU utilizes. If for any reason you cannot fill that form, or your medical professional cannot fill that form, there are specific instructions in that website that will let you know what is required. Some other pieces of evidence could be letters from counselors or other professionals, emails sent to your instructors or the program chairs or directors, and the emails from group members. So once again, the possibilities of proving your ground for appeal are not limited, and Linda and myself can advise on what can be adequate in your specific situation.
Okay, thank you, Hector. I'm just putting a link in the chat to our information package on grade and standing appeals. So that's a very helpful resource that does include templates to help you get started with writing your appeal statements. But we encourage you to really make it your own. Use your own voice. You don't have to rely on the exact wording in the template. It's just meant to be a guide to help you just see the basics of what is really required for a strong appeal statement. Okay. And I think we will go on, let's see, in the next slide here, we'll talk about the formal appeal. So this, of course, is available. It's a student right, so all students have the right to file an appeal, but it's especially relevant and good for students who meet the grounds of appeal, as we described already, and especially for when you've not been able to resolve the issue informally with the course instructor or with the chair or director from the teaching department or your home program in the case of a standing appeal. So you should just know that there are multiple levels of appeals. So the first level is to the department or school or program. So if you're doing a grade appeal related to a math course, the decision maker should be the chair or director from the math department. Sometimes with Chang school courses, folks who are the academic coordinators up through Chang school sometimes are the decision makers. However, in my interpretation of the policy, I believe it really should be the chair or director, no matter what, of the teaching department, like of the academic home for that course. Anywho, so just know that appeal submissions should include your written statement. It could be a letter, or you could just, if you want to keep it simple, use the text boxes in the appeal form. It's like a Google form through the online submission system. We'll touch on that shortly. And then always, wherever possible, try to include supporting documentation, because the decision makers are academics. They're people that typically like to make evidence-based decisions. So make it easy for them. Just provide emails or provide anything that can help back up your claim. Okay.
So here are the online appeal submission websites. As Linda said, the appeals are submitted online. And when submitting your documents, it is very important to identify them properly. So, and also I have seen a very common confusion among students, because when you go to the Senate appeals website, there are two different boxes, one for academic misconduct and one for academic appeals. And you should be careful that when you're dealing with grade and standing appeals, you are not using the box about academic misconduct. Sometimes it could appear that both boxes are well identified, but I have seen cases where students submit a grade or a standing appeal to the academic misconduct office. So be careful to choose the right box. And in case of doubt, Linda and myself will be always there to guide you through the process. Even though I have been telling some students that since we are not students, sometimes we don't have access to those links that are specifically designed to log in as a student.
Yes, I just want to add that, like, it's a lot of information. Like, for example, if you go to the Senate website, there is a lot of options. There's a lot of info there. And so you just have to read carefully. And I'm sorry that I didn't update these URLs you see on the slide. They still say Ryerson. Sorry about that. Obviously, that's torontomu.ca at the beginning of those links there that you see visually. But the link I put in the chat just a moment ago is the one that I believe should take you exactly to where you want to go for a grade and a standing appeal. But because I'm not a student, I can't actually fact check that for you right now. But it's the one that says like Senate apps / at the end. And then also, like, if you want to generally go to the Senate website, I'm putting that in the chat right now too. Oh wait, that's not it. You'll see what we mean by just how, like, there's a lot of information and there's a lot of these blue boxes that you can click on. So yeah. Anyway, like I said before, you are welcome if you get confused with the actual technical system for the submission of your appeal, follow up with the Senate office. So we have their emails in an upcoming slide. And again, you can find their contact information on that website that we put in the chat. So it's all there for you. Okay, I think the next slide is me here, writing your appeal statement. So just to begin with, just try to keep it simple. So the appeal statement is your opportunity to explain what happened and how it had a negative impact on your academic performance. And you have to explain what you're asking for to solve the problem. Okay, so you must explain in detail these three things, A, B, C. So they're broken out as section A, B, C in the submission process online as well. Okay, so number one, you have to explain what your grounds of appeal are. Be very clear about it. It has to be either extenuating circumstances, course management, procedural error, or prejudice, right? And then B, what actions you took to try to resolve the problem. And finally, C, what remedy are you asking for to solve the problem?
So whenever you're touching on your grounds of appeal, it is very important to start an explanation of what happened, what went wrong, and set the full context. As Linda was saying before, it is very important to clarify the ground that you are appealing under and refer to the dates and supporting documentation in your appeals. And this must be consistent. I have seen many students that argue that they faced extenuating circumstances in 2021, but yet they are filing an appeal about a grade that was issued on the spring-summer 2023 semester. So it sometimes may be difficult for the decision maker to make a connection between those extenuating circumstances and the failure to academically perform optimally. So it is very important to make a direct connection or explain how the extenuating circumstances or the grounds of appeal have an impact on the academic performance and can, of course, justify a decision granting the corresponding appeal. As Linda was saying, this is an opportunity of you to explain what happened. Sometimes it is called to share your perspective, and you can provide a certain amount of detail without going into too much of sharing of private personal information. Sometimes in extenuating circumstances, you are facing some situations that maybe you would not feel very comfortable disclosing. Of course, it's important to let you know that Linda and myself have a duty of confidentiality, so we cannot share any information that you provide to us with any other people unless there is an obligation to disclose. But at the end of the day, your personal perspective matters and can help the decision makers to see the personal side of the story. So that's why it's very important, and Linda also touched a little bit on this before. It is very important that you are the one drafting your appeal letters, because you can express yourself, your situation, and nobody knows what happened to you better than yourself. So it is very important, of course, that you take into consideration, and I'm referring mostly to extenuating circumstances because it is not only the main ground for appeal, but also the one that has more clearly explained what requirements need to be met. Linda already spoke about this, but it has to be unforeseen or unforeseeable. So I have seen some cases where the students have been feeling sick and still they decide to go and to the examination room and to present an exam, and that bounds them in a certain way to finish the exam. So there is policy 135 regarding final exams, and it says that if a student sits for an exam, it is expected that they should be able to finish the exam. Of course, this doesn't imply that you are not facing extenuating circumstances that could be affecting your specific performance. But these are the kind of things that you need to consider and explain in your appeal letter.
Great. Okay, so on to section B of what will be in your appeal statement is all about the actions you took to try to resolve the issue that occurred. So it's mostly going to be, wait, sorry, I'm just going back for a second, the grounds, actions that you took. So it's usually communication, like, informing the instructor for the course or consulting with your program, anyone at the university really, like about like a problem that you encountered, or like requesting academic consideration, for example, is a really strong action that students can take. And this is what this slide kind of touches on. So like if you're not sure like how to tackle this section, just kind of write a timeline of what happened in order, of the order that things occurred, add in dates, be specific. So like the example here, if you were unwell, you went to hopefully a doctor or a health professional about the issue, and you got health certificate or a letter from your doctor to request academic consideration, which is the term that is used at TMU to ask for a deferral or ask for an extension for an assignment. So, and it could be a simple, like technically you're supposed to use the ACR system or academic consideration request system. However, you can just email your professor. You can just email folks. That can work too. So, and then for example, maybe you didn't get a response, or maybe your request was denied and you weren't given an extension, or you weren't given another chance to write the test. Anyway, you have to usually just explain what happened during the semester in question with, if it's a grade appeal, that specific course. And then here's some other examples. I'll just quickly go over this. So just reflect on these questions. Did you contact your professor at all? Did you contact your department? Did you consult with any other like professionals about the issue, that you can show that you did seek out like at least assistance to maybe help your well-being or anything like that. And again, just try to be as clear and specific as you can, just to help people follow along. Like when we say be specific, it's usually just to help the person reading the letter, the decision maker, most importantly, be able to follow along and get what you're saying, and hopefully be compelled to like sympathize and like see your point of view, right? And then finally, and this is really important because I know a lot of students just don't know that they actually are expected and kind of required to consult with professors to ask for assistance. Like, it can be intimidating, and some people just don't think that that is what they need to do. But at this university, it really is expected, and it is required normally for academic consideration to be granted. So, and if you didn't take many actions to try to resolve the issue, if you didn't consult with anyone or notify the instructor, just explain why. Just elaborate on why you didn't, right? That's important to, like, you just don't want to ignore this section or leave it blank in the text boxes. Like, you need to explain why you did or why you did not take action. Okay.
Remedies. So this is perhaps one of the most important sections because it is what you are looking to get out of the whole appeal process. Your appeal letter, and this is, by the way, section C in the online submission form. So your appeal letter includes what you consider to be a valid resolution to your specific situation, and it may relate to any missed work or an exam. So, for example, and I think that we will be touching a little bit more on this in other slides, but you can ask to retake an exam, you can ask to resubmit missed assignments, you can even ask to submit supplemental assignments to bring the grade up. Remember that, and we will touch upon what remedies are not appropriate, and of course, any kind of solution that you propose has to be in accordance to policy, and generally it is policy 168.
So with a standing appeal, specifically, you will want to, just explain what you will do to ensure that past difficulties will no longer impact you. Think about whether you have taken other courses to kind of supplement your learning if you do struggle with a specific area that's required in your program. Like, for example, if you've been doing workshops or college level courses relating to accounting or math, if those are kind of weak spots that you have and related to your program's curriculum, that's a really good thing to reflect on and towards the end of your standing appeal statement, because that's a reason why you would be more successful going forward, right? If you're allowed to return to the program. Think about whether this is the right program for you, and why finishing the program is important to your future and your career goals. Yeah, you can discuss how being out of the program would have a negative impact on you. And just basically you want to compel the decision maker to allow you to return, to have another chance to be successful and go on to graduate. And then here's, oh, sorry, I'm just on a roll. Okay, so remedies and solutions, these are the examples that I think Hector was referring to earlier. So we have a list of good remedies or solutions to suggest. And again, you can suggest multiple. You might want to list them in order of what would be preferable for you. So you could ask for another chance to write or even rewrite. It's a higher kind of ask. It's like a bit more unlikely, but still maybe possible to do the final exam. Or maybe it was a midterm that you missed or really struggled with. And then you could ask for a regrade or a reassessment of the final paper. You could ask for an incomplete grade. It's not listed here, but an incomplete grade is just a way that is giving you an extension to complete outstanding assignments or outstanding tasks or requirements from the course into the next semester. So it's basically allowing you some more time to just finish whatever you weren't able to finish before the end of the course. And so INCs are just a temporary kind of, it's not even a grade, but it's like a registrar's like indicator, like would be there. It means incomplete. And it also means that you will have 3 months to complete the outstanding work. And just be aware that if you don't complete the outstanding work within 3 months, the INCs automatically convert into F grades. So you would just be in touch with the instructor for the course to establish whatever new deadlines that things would need to be finished by. So that could be a really great remedy to request in a grade appeal. And retroactive course drops are a bit complicated. They're a kind of high bar to ask for. However, if you were totally incapacitated and you have strong documentation to prove that, and you were unable to drop the course before the deadline due to your extenuating circumstances and your serious incapacitation, then it may be very appropriate and reasonable to ask for a retroactive withdrawal. It just removes your enrollment for that course, or it could be for multiple courses from the past semester. And just know that the university is very strict with these. Through the grade and standing appeal process, it would just be like an endorsement that you might get if like if your appeal could be granted, but the retroactive course drop would just be recommended or supported by the decision maker, and it's up to the final kind of review and final decision making of the registrar's office. So just be aware of that. And then for standing appeals, you typically are asking to return to your program on a probationary contract or a provisional plan or contract if you're a graduate student. And then we have these bad solutions that I'm not even going to verbalize because like you just shouldn't ask for them. I hope they make sense, right? Like you have to ask for things that are within university policy, and just remember that grades need to be earned. You can't just like ask for an A. Anyway, okay. Over to you, Hector, with this one. Sorry, I've been talking so much.
Yes, it is very important to be honest, as you can read in this slide. Sometimes students may feel tempted to make up any kind of excuse to try to justify poor academic performance. That will not make it in a grade or a standing appeal. The professors and the program chairs pay a great deal of attention in the argument that the student makes, as well as the whole relationship. As we have been speaking, if you didn't reach out to the professor, if you didn't raise the concern, then it may appear as if extenuating circumstances could be used simply as an excuse for poor academic performance. It is always, and it will always be our advice to be completely honest in your argument and honest in the documents that you submit. You should take into consideration that submitting false statements or false information and false documents could create a very serious problem for you, because this would take your case from a grade or a standing appeal to an academic misconduct suspicion, and that could be that could bring very terrible consequences for you and for your academics in general. In academic misconduct cases, you could be talking of penalties that can go from a grade reduction down to a 0, and of course, suspension when the conducts are repeated or are very serious in nature. So a finding of academic misconduct would be a lot worse than simply being honest in your grade and standing appeals. Once again, as I was saying, the penalties in an academic misconduct could be from 1 term to 2 year suspension, and they can even go higher up when it is some kind of misrepresentation.
The writing this season is just so lazy. The writers are just completely out of ideas. In investigating Trump, the DOJ sends a search warrant to Twitter.
Sorry, I fixed that problem. Continue. Sorry about that, Hector. Are you able to continue? Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry. So as I was saying, the penalties can go even higher. It can be a disciplinary withdrawal when there is a serious misrepresentation, and some professors even raise the possibility, or not the possibility, but caution the students that forging, falsifying, and of course misrepresenting are even criminal conducts. So once again, being honest is always recommendable.
Okay. Thank you, Hector. Okay, here we'll go to the next slide. Okay, if you're just puzzled, perplexed, and feeling overwhelmed and not sure where to start, just grab some paper, open up a Word document, and just describe what happened. You'll find that you'll basically come up with an outline, or use our templates that we have in the court, or what's it called? Appeal information packages that I put the link to in the chat. Those are great kind of tools to just help get you going with drafting. Make sure you explain how your situation fits within the grounds from policy 168, the grade and standing appeal policy. If there are complicating factors, explain them. Don't ignore them. But try not to be super long-winded with your explanations also. Try to be concise where possible. And also, it's always a good idea to get someone else to read over your statement before you submit it. Just even for proofreading to make sure it's clear, legible, things like that. And just know that the statement doesn't need to be perfect, but you want to make sure that you're including as much relevant information as you can to make a strong argument, make a strong case.
Well, what happens if your appeal is denied? Linda already touched a little bit upon this, and there are 3 different levels of appeal. The first one would be what we call a department or school level of appeal. If that is denied, then you can file a second level of appeal that is called the faculty level of appeal. And you have a third and final instance that would be the Senate level of appeal. It is very important to say that this final level of appeal is not guaranteed and is a little bit different than the other 2 levels. So whenever you're facing any situation that may be affecting your academic performance, according to the 4 grounds for appeal that we have discussed, you can, of course, file your first level of appeal. Some students have asked me if they can go directly to the faculty level or to the Senate level of appeals. No, that is not the way this goes. The way that appeals work is that you have to exhaust every level of appeal before the next one is available. So if you file a department or a faculty level appeal, it will be admitted in most instances, if not in all of them, and it will go through the proper examination and the proper resolution process. This does not happen with Senate. In Senate, you have to meet certain requirements that in order to have a hearing, and the Senate will, when receiving an appeal, they will convene a panel to determine whether there are grounds for a hearing, or they can issue what they call a notice of intent to dismiss. And this is not uncommon, unfortunately, because once again, and the example that I give to students, the Senate would be somehow equivalent to the Supreme Court of Canada. They don't hear absolutely all the cases that are raised to their consideration. Anyway, you should bear in mind that the general deadline to file an appeal is of 10 business days from the date in which you receive the unfavorable decision, or if it's a first level of appeal, from the date in which the grade or the standing was officially communicated to you. There is, as we were saying before, a general deadline that will be expiring on September the 7th for most of the grades that have been issued in the spring-summer 2023 semester. And you should be always mindful of that deadline. Of course, and even when it is not desirable, if you miss the deadline, there is still an opportunity to file the appeal, but you would have to go to the program chair or to the dean, according to the different levels of appeal, to ask for a special permission to file your appeal letter out of time. Your grounds of appeal must be consistent throughout the different levels of appeal. And it is important, I think that I mentioned that before, to give your best shot at the first level of appeal. You want to win your case at the first level of appeal to avoid the uncertainty, the pressure, the need to go to the other stages of the appeal, in the appeal process, to get the kind of resolution that you are looking for. It is also important to mention that if you find substantial procedural errors, you may bring them anytime, even when you didn't raise those issues at the first levels of appeal. But once again, you should be mindful of the grounds that you are using since the beginning of the appeal process. There may be a hearing at the Senate level where a binding decision is made. Once again, this is different from the department and the faculty level appeals, where everything is in writing. You submit your appeal letter, and in the course of 10 business days, you should be receiving the corresponding decision. At the Senate level of appeal, if your case makes it through the hearing, you will have an opportunity to present your case before a panel. And of course, in that process, you would be offering an opening statement. The panel will be asking questions from you and from the respondent, and then you will be allowed to make some closing statements as well as the respondent, and they will be rendering their decision within 10 business days from the date of the hearing.
Okay, so if you're feeling unsure, maybe hesitant to appeal, just think about whether you have valid grounds for your grade and or standing appeal, and then appeal. Why not? You should not be penalized for submitting an appeal. As long as you are honest and respectful in what you submit, there should be no negative outcomes. There should be no harm. And there should be no like reprisal or retaliation in any way. That's against university policy. And if you feel like something like that does occur, then we encourage you to follow up with one of us or with the ombuds person of the university, who will show their contact information in the next slide. But just know that you could, through the appeal process, be successful in solving the problem. Appeals can be granted. It is possible. Some people have this very negative view of grade appeals and standing appeals, that they're just always going to be denied. They're just not possible. It's maybe not worth your time. And I think both Hector and I feel that that's not totally accurate. It can be very, very helpful and constructive. It could even in itself be a learning process. And it could be really worth your time and save you maybe a year of having to redo a course or having to avoid being required to withdraw for a whole year from your program, things like that. Okay, so think about it, go for it. Be in touch with us if you run into any roadblocks or dilemmas. Yeah.
Okay, so other resources that you should be mindful of are, of course, counseling services, academic accommodation services, and the Human Rights Office. And we are simply providing their contact information. But remember, always look for assistance. Some of these situations can be dealt with, and there are specialized people that are more than willing to assist you in any difficulty that you might be facing through your academic path. So don't hesitate to seek for counseling services or academic accommodations or the Human Rights Office if needed. And the Human Rights Office is mostly about fairness kind of issues. So the appropriate steps would be to first exhaust all the possibilities that you have. And if you feel that you have been treated unfairly in any of those instances, then you can go to the Human Rights Office and see if there is any possible alternative remedy. It is important to say that the Human Rights Office doesn't make any kind of decision. The decision will always be reached through the corresponding appeals. So don't be confused. You cannot go to the Human Rights Office instead of filing an appeal. You have to file your appeals, and as a last resort, you can go to, in cases of unfair treatment, you can go to the Human Rights Office.
Great. And so on to just some contact information. I will just note a little bit about the Ombudsperson's office. That is a really great resource for students. Ombuds people help in any kind of concerns related to fairness. So particularly this Ombudsperson's office is really open to meeting, consulting with students at anywhere in a process related to a complaint about the university. Like if you feel that you are treated unfairly in any respect, really, they'll be available to talk to you on the phone or meet with you in a confidential way to discuss the situation. So they normally do not help with appeals specifically. That's more of what Hector and I do as advocates, because we're more in your corner to like be your coach or like big support for filing the strongest appeal, and we'll help you craft your appeal statements, talk on your behalf at hearings, things like that. But if you have any like broader like systemic fairness type issues or questions, definitely reach out to Maureen Helt or Gemma Kerr at the Ombuds office. They're separate from the university. They're totally impartial and independent. So they're great. And then yes, you see our emails and phone extensions for Hector and myself there. I think just note that I really prefer email. I'll let Hector speak to that, but like email is great. In terms of on the phone, we can set up a meeting on the phone or a Google meeting, like a virtual meeting, if you'd like. But if you just try to call my phone extension, I am not there that often. I predominantly work from home, and I'm only in the office 1 day a week. So it's just more efficient to email me. Just putting that out there. Hector, what's your preference?
Yes, my preference is always email. And of course, when any student faces or wants to meet in person, as you say, we have a specific appointment system that is available in our TMSU website. So you could feel free to book an appointment with us. Normally, the difficulties with the telephone is that we might be in other meetings, we might be in seminars or workshops like this one. So sometimes, personally, I'm not able to attend telephone calls, and I always prefer either meeting with the student in a scheduled appointment or via email.
Awesome. So I just looked up and have the link. I'll put it in the chat for your appointment booking system. Sorry, just typing. Okay, there. And then mine is probably the same webpage you use to register for this webinar. That one. But you can also just email.
And perhaps, Linda, one recommendation to all of the students would be to check our written materials, because they may find the responses that they are looking in those materials. And of course, we are more than happy to assist and to respond to questions and to look at drafts of appeal letters and to guide you through this process. But if you feel comfortable, you can, of course, find many of the responses that you are looking for in the printed materials, as well as in Policy 168.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And then finally, I'll just note that you're welcome to be in touch with the Senate office. I'm reiterating that point because I think I've said that already, but the folks at the Senate office can be really helpful and can troubleshoot any technical issues you might have with the submission system or anything like that. So there's their email and their phone extension. And I think that is the last slide. Yeah. Maybe I'll stop the recording and then we can just chat with folks who are here in the webinar in this meeting. Okay, so thanks folks watching the recording. Have a good day and good luck with your appeals.